Hello and welcome to the coronavirus update for the 4th of May 2020, where we've had about 3.5 million confirmed cases in the world and just over 250,000 people have sadly died from this, which does actually mean that we've kind of turned a point here. So I've been taking the ratio of these two numbers for some time now. The ratio of those two numbers basically gives you the fatality rate of the virus with confirmed cases. This isn't all cases, it's just confirmed cases. Anyway, if you actually take a look at that, what you find is that if you take a look at the death rate versus the total number of cases, they're finally basically plateauing out. But they plateau out at about 7%, which means if you get confirmed with the virus, just statistically, you've got a 7% chance of dying from it. This, of course, doesn't take into account those who get the virus but are never tested. Anyway, so one of the things I want to look at today, actually just briefly touch on how the US is doing. So I've been sort of taking this as peak cases in the US and so roughly extrapolating how long it's going to take to get down to the level where the national emergency was declared, which was 500 cases per day. And it's still looking at a couple of months till you get down to that sort of level. And of course, the social distancing guidelines of the US government were dropped at the beginning of this month. So, if you go back to the world spread rate from having about, what's America at the moment? It's about a million cases. That's 1/3% of Americans have it. So, in 3 days of world spread rate, it would be 1%. Then another 3 days. It's an order of magnitude every 10 days after that. So, in about 2 weeks, you'd be looking at 10% of the country being infected. Less than a month, basically, is how long it'll take of the world spread rate from this to infecting the entire country. And this is one of the things I really wanted to touch on, because there really does seem to be this strong effort to basically blame this on China. After all, the virus did originate in China, which is true enough. The thing is that China's not responsible for managing the borders in America. America is. And that includes who brings disease into your country. This is why there are things like the Center for Disease Control. And, the rough timeline is end of January, the World Health Organization declares this national health emergency. A few days after that, Trump announces this travel ban from China, but it only affects Chinese people coming into America. Americans coming home basically get almost no screening. The practical upshot is it only decreases the travel from China by about 50%. Not that any of that greatly matters anyway, because most of the virus probably came in through Europe. And the thing that really probably screwed America over here was, even though there were test protocols available in very early February, the Center for Disease Control decided that they wanted to make their own tests. And when they made them, they didn't really work that well. So since they had all these tests, they wanted to fix them. And by the time they'd gone through all of that, a month had essentially gone by. And it was at the beginning of March that Trump declares the state of national emergency when there's about 500 cases or so. But the thing is that even at that, when there were 500 cases in the entire country, with a concerted, competent federal response, this could have all been contained. So what you would do is you declare the state of emergency and you quarantine all the areas where there's the virus. you limit travel to everywhere else, you basically take it seriously. But this would, of course, mean that, that there's going to be consequences to this. A lot of people are going to be unhappy about it. But the practical upshot is you take a look at the alternatives, that if you let the virus spread basically uncontained for another 2 weeks or something, then the only options available to you are nationwide lockdown type things. And even at that wasn't done on a federal level. It was basically Trump declared the state of emergency and then said, well, you're on your own to handle it as states, which is not a competent way to handle a pandemic. Because if you're, say, for instance, next to Georgia, who, even when America was sort of peaking out, was saying, wow, we've only just found out that there can be asymptomatic cases of the virus. People can be spreading it without even knowing that they have it. And you're next to them and you've got really good antivirus procedures in place. All of your efforts are basically destroyed just by being next to a state which doesn't have those. And so the lack of a coherent nationwide response is, I think, one of the reasons that America is basically just a disaster. And all this talk about reopening now, like I'm saying, you're probably only another month away from, adding 2 zeros. Yeah, pretty much 2 zeros to these numbers. You'll be up to, well, the number that Trump bandies around is 2 million. 2 million dead in, probably less than a month. Now, the bizarre thing is this. Okay, let's put South Korea up again as the archetypal. This is what it would look like if you had your stuff together. That you get on mostly on top of it in a couple of weeks, and there's a lot of tracking down cases. There's a lot of work that goes into this. There's a lot of cost that goes into it. Basically, you need a centralized organization that you basically throw money at, and they deal with this sort of thing. This has just not been the case in. Well, okay. Let's keep scrolling through the European countries. Spain. Well, it's broader than the others, but it's a long way down from peak. Italy, the one that got it really bad really early. Well, again, they're struggling, but it's coming down fairly quickly. There's not this bit where it just goes up and stays up, which is, if you take a look at the UK, just it's not coming down. And the only other place that's really like that is the United States. And even if you take a look at places like France, you've got to use the eye of faith here because they changed their counting statistics. But, it peaks and it comes down. And Germany, it peaks and it comes down. Now, both of these countries, UK, I obviously lived in for some extended period of time. And, I've got relatives who live there, so I talk quite a lot about the state of the country. And basically, I wouldn't trust the British government to open a can of beans. And this goes back basically to the latest Conservative government. I'm not saying that the previous Labour government was any better, but the sheer levels of ineptitude just went through the roof once the Bullingdon Club era of Conservatives came in, to the point where, the British government always had this tradition that it could take any project, make it cost 10 times as much as it originally should have cost, may take it 10 times longer, and get it to do 1/10 of what it should have done. And Brexit is maybe a nice example of this, that even you're just ignoring whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, how competently was it handled? I mean, all that really had to be done was you say, okay, we're going to leave the European Union. We need to decide what we want, and we need to negotiate it with the European Union. And Basically, they had no clue what the hell they were doing, to the point where time and time again they get up to these sort of emergency deadlines. And this is with years of time to play with. This is a pandemic where days matter. And for things like that, it's almost an alien concept for the British government to act competently for something like this. So yeah, it's just not something that I would expect. And you take a look at what comes out of the government. Well, they have their daily briefings where they read out to the exact number, the number of people who have been tested and have the virus and the number of people who have died to the exact person, when, in reality, these numbers are all fairly flexible. They really are. You plot up the number of deaths from last year and the spike of deaths in this year, you can easily get a factor of 2 above this. So reading out the deaths to the exact number, it just sort of reeks of, I want to sound informed, but it just comes across to me as really try-hardy and PR type stuff. Well, you take a look at America. Well, Trump has historically been the guy who just stands there and takes the credit for things that are good, takes the credit for things that are happening that are good, and blames other people for things that are happening are bad, even though he's had almost nothing to do with them. So, for instance, he always tells people how well the economy is doing under Trump, and it's all his brilliant leadership that's doing it. Now, anyone who has any knowledge of the way things work, this is not unique to America, but whether the economy is doing good or bad has so little to do with the leadership. But that doesn't stop people like Trump from claiming, no, it's all his brilliant leadership. So let's just take a look at a couple of numbers. GDP per year for the last, what are we on? 30 years. Okay. So this is the recession at the end of, the Bush administration. This is the Obama years, these first 8 here. And these are the Trump years, the 4 at the end. You can see the remarkable growth that's happened under Trump. Right? No, I mean, there's nothing even remotely spectacular about Trump. Yeah, if you actually listen to him, he's non-stop. Oh, we had such a brilliant economy. No one's ever had such a brilliant economy. No one's turned it around. No one thought we could do so well on jobs, for instance. And you take a look at the jobs for the last, what are we on, 20 years. And this is the recession, of course, where there's a huge spike in the number of unemployed. And yeah, it's basically, there is nothing spectacular about what the economy has done under Trump. So, but the thing is that, just sitting there as essentially a PR man, it's almost a confirmational bias thing. The day is beautiful because of the hard work that I did. You just take credit for anything that's good that happens and blame people for anything that's bad that happens. The problem is there is zero leadership that went into any of this. And that doesn't work when you've got a real problem. There is a real problem here. And you take a look at what Trump was doing. He was basically going out for these hour-long, 2-hour-long press sessions where he would tell people how fantastically everyone was doing. It very kind of reminds me of, I knew someone, my dad knew someone, who was in Germany, World War II. And the thing was, the government, the propaganda, was always telling you about the brilliant victories that were being won by the glorious Nazi party. But the bizarre thing was, that the victories, the brilliant victories the Nazis were winning, were getting closer and closer to Berlin. And, educated population could sort of spot things like that. Now you look at it in America, every time that Trump goes out and says what a brilliant job he's doing, the numbers are getting higher and higher. It's you expect people to notice at some point that you went from a country that basically has no red on it to a country that's almost entirely red, and every time you made the right decisions. The reality is, of course, had this month not been blown in the middle here, that would have basically knocked 3 orders of magnitude off the total number of cases in America, which means that, rather than looking at 68,000 deaths right now, you'd be looking at about 68 deaths. Now, of course, that would have looked like a massive overreaction, and it's very difficult to sell it in the PR sense that if that had been the case, let's just sort of take a trip to an alternative reality where the US government steps in very early on. It quarantines everyone coming into the country for 2 weeks. Stringent, a massive disruption on the economy and that sort of thing. Not $2 trillion worth of disruption, but it would be a huge disruption. And the massive testing, centralized facilities tracking where people are going and all that sort of thing, if they had the virus. And what are you going to end up with? 68 people dying. And you absolutely know that people would be just sort of pointing and laughing at all this effort that you went to, and only 68 people died in the end. Yeah. The simple reality is, I'm not so sure this was dodgeable. Almost the only people who seemed to dodge it were people like South Korea and to a degree China. And the reason is because they've actually had proto-pandemics before. They have had things like SARS and MERS outbreaks in their country. So for them, they could have what looks like this massive overreaction, and people would be fine with it because they'd actually seen what it would look like if one of these things really did start to ramp up in their country, which, just really wasn't the case with Europe, which was fairly slow getting its arse in gear, but seems to be mostly doing okay now, and America. Anyway, so I'll leave you at that. Many thanks for watching again, and see you next time.